The millionaire's house was large and grand, with tall windows that let the sunlight flood the rooms and shiny floors that reflected every movement. Yet despite all the wealth and luxury, the house felt empty in a way that money could not fix. The little daughter ran through the halls like a whirlwind, her laughter echoing off the walls one moment and her cries filling the air the next. She was a lively child, full of energy and curiosity, but her spirit was hard to manage. No one could keep up with her. The father watched helplessly from the study one morning as the latest maid tried to stop his daughter from climbing onto the sofa's armrest. "Sit down, please," the maid said with a strained voice, trying to maintain authority. The little girl ignored her and giggled, balancing on the edge like it was a game of skill. Within minutes, the maid's patience snapped, and she raised her voice slightly, which made the little girl squeal with defiance. Moments later, the maid left the room, muttering something about being unable to handle the child. The father rubbed his temples and sighed, realizing this was a pattern. Many maids had come and gone. Some lasted a day, others a week, and very few managed even a month. Each one thought they could control the child with rules, punishments, or firm commands. Each one failed. The little girl did not respond well to authority. She challenged it with mischievous tricks, endless questions, and bursts of energy that never seemed to end. She had a bright mind and a keen sense of observation, which made her smart enough to know when someone was trying to trick or manipulate her. It wasn't that the maids were unskilled. Many were experienced, trained in childcare, and came from good families. But the child's spirit was special. She wanted attention, understanding, and someone to truly see her, not just someone who followed instructions and enforced rules. Her father had tried to explain to the maids that she needed love, patience, and care, but most could not grasp it. They either became frustrated or indifferent, leaving the girl confused and upset. The father often wondered if he was asking for too much. He had tried everything, tutors, nannies, and strict schedules, but nothing seemed to work. His work as a businessman demanded long hours, and while he provided all the comforts money could buy, he could not provide the one thing his daughter needed most: someone who could connect with her heart. On this particular morning, he watched as the little girl ran into the kitchen, her small feet tapping against the shiny tiles. She reached for the cookie jar, which was on the countertop, too high for her little hands. The maid sighed, knowing she would have to lift her up. "Careful," she said as she hoisted the child onto her shoulders. The little girl giggled and grabbed the cookie, but in her excitement she dropped it on the floor. The maid scolded her gently, but the child only laughed louder, dancing away before the maid could react. It was a pattern the father knew too well. Every morning he would wake up to find the little girl testing the limits of everyone around her. She asked endless questions, sometimes about things too complicated for a child her age. She often contradicted the maid's instructions, not out of disrespect, but out of curiosity and a desire to understand the world for herself. Her laughter was infectious, but her defiance made childcare a constant battle. The father had even tried explaining the situation to family and friends. "She is intelligent and independent," he would say, "but no one can manage her. I am at my wit's end." Friends would nod sympathetically, offering advice and suggestions, but nothing ever seemed to help. Each suggestion failed when tested in the real world with the child. The house remained a revolving door of maids, each one lasting only a short while before giving up. He remembered the first maid who truly tried to stay. She had been kind and caring, but when the little girl refused to nap for days, the maid became exhausted. The girl would run around the house, climb onto furniture, and hide in corners, testing boundaries and exploring every room. Eventually, the maid left, tears in her eyes, apologizing that she could not handle the child's energy. The father felt a mix of frustration and guilt. He wondered if the problem was with the child or if he had been expecting too much. Another maid had tried to use structure and rules to control the child's behavior. She set schedules, made charts, and offered rewards for good behavior. At first, the child seemed to follow along, but soon she found ways to bend the rules. She would sneak treats, ask questions to confuse the maid, and create games that turned the structure into fun. The maid eventually gave up, claiming that the child was too clever and independent to manage. Over time, the father realized that the usual methods of childcare simply would not work. His daughter needed more than rules and instructions. She needed someone who could match her energy, understand her curiosity, and connect with her on a personal level. But finding such a person felt impossible. Many people had tried and all had failed. He began to feel a sense of hopelessness, wondering if anyone could ever care for his daughter properly. The little girl, on the other hand, remained unaware of the challenges she caused. She saw life as a series of adventures, each room in the house a new landscape to explore. She loved climbing, running, asking questions and discovering new things. She wanted someone to play with her, laugh with her, and teach her about the world in ways that were fun and engaging. Most adults, however, became frustrated or impatient, and she would either ignore them or test them further. One rainy afternoon, the father sat in his study, listening to the little girl's laughter bouncing off the walls. He thought about all the maids who had come and gone, each leaving a small mark of disappointment behind. He sighed deeply, wishing he could find someone who could stay, someone who could be patient, loving, and understanding. He knew that if he didn't find the right person soon, his daughter might grow up feeling that adults couldn't truly understand her. The child ran into the study, her hair slightly wet from the rain, and threw herself onto the sofa. She smiled up at her father and asked, "Why do maids always leave?" The question caught him off guard. He had never explained the situation to her, but somehow she noticed the pattern. He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "It's not because of you," he said softly. "It's because finding someone who can care for you the right way is very hard. But I promise we'll keep trying." The little girl tilted her head, thinking, then smiled mischievously. "Maybe the next one will like my games," she said. Her father chuckled, realizing that she didn't see her energy as a problem. She saw it as fun and exciting. It was a perspective he wished more people could understand. Days turned into weeks, and the father continued his search. He interviewed more maids, asking for patience, experience, and understanding. Many seemed promising at first, but soon the same pattern repeated. The little girl would test them with her endless questions, playful tricks, and high energy. Most left after a few days, apologizing that they were not strong enough to handle her spirit. Each time, the father felt a pang of worry, wondering if anyone could ever succeed. Despite the constant disappointment, the father never gave up hope. He believed that somewhere out there, someone could connect with his daughter's heart. He knew she needed more than rules or instructions. She needed someone who could see her, understand her, and guide her without trying to change who she was. The search was exhausting, but he refused to settle for someone who could not truly care for her. As the sun set each evening, the little girl would curl up with her toys, still full of questions and stories to tell. The father watched from a distance, hoping that one day, someone would come along who could match her energy, respect her curiosity, and provide the love and guidance she deserved. He did not know when that day would come, but he knew it was worth waiting for. The house, despite all its luxury and comfort, felt incomplete without the right person to care for the child. The laughter and energy of the little girl were constant reminders that love and patience were more important than wealth. And so the search continued, with hope as the guiding light that kept the father going, believing that someone would eventually come along to succeed where others had failed. The house felt different that morning. There was a quiet anticipation in the air, a small flicker of hope that perhaps this time would be different. A new maid had arrived, someone recommended by a friend who insisted she had a special way with children. The father greeted her politely, explaining the house rules and the child's temperament. He tried not to sound too doubtful, but after so many maids had left, he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. The maid, however, seemed calm and collected. She nodded, listening carefully, her eyes gentle and patient. She did not promise miracles or act as if she could control the child with rules and schedules. Instead, she simply said she would try to understand the child and do her best. Her calmness and quiet confidence gave the father a small sense of relief. Perhaps this time things would go differently. The little girl watched from the staircase as the maid unpacked her things. Her curiosity was immediate. Who was this new person? Would she be like the others, trying to force her to behave, or would she leave after a few days? The little girl decided to test her right away. She ran down the stairs, her small feet tapping quickly, and hid behind a chair, peeking. To see how the maid would react, the maid noticed the movement and smiled softly. She did not call out or scold the child. Instead, she walked slowly toward her, keeping her hands visible and her movements gentle. "Hello there," she said in a warm voice. "I'm going to be helping around the house."
What's your name?
The little girl blinked, surprised by the calm tone. Most adults either tried to assert authority immediately or scolded her when she didn't follow instructions. This maid was different. She didn't demand obedience. She just wanted to meet her. Slowly, the girl stepped out from behind the chair and said her name. The maid knelt slightly, keeping her eyes level with the child's. "It's nice to meet you. I hope we can have fun together while I help around the house," she said. The father watched from the doorway, astonished at the interaction. He had never seen anyone approach his daughter this way. He kept quiet, letting them have their first meeting without interference. For the first time, the little girl seemed curious about the maid, not skeptical or defiant. She asked a few questions and the maid answered patiently, never raising her voice or showing frustration. Over the next few days, the real challenge began. The little girl tested the maid in ways she had tested all the others. She climbed onto furniture, asked endless questions, hid from chores, and created mischief. But the maid did not react the way the others had. She did not scold or punish. Instead, she observed carefully, learning the child's patterns and preferences. She noticed what made her laugh, what frustrated her, and what calmed her down. One morning, the little girl decided to see how far she could push the maid. She poured water from a cup onto the floor, laughing as it spread in small puddles. The maid did not shout or show anger. Instead, she calmly took a towel and began cleaning, making a small joke about slipping if they weren't careful. The child's laughter turned into curiosity. She asked why the water spread that way, and the maid explained it simply, turning the mess into a small science lesson. The little girl's eyes widened with interest, and for the first time, she forgot to be mischievous. The maid also discovered ways to engage the child in play that taught patience and cooperation without being boring. She created small games that allowed the little girl to use her energy and curiosity in productive ways. For example, she set up scavenger hunts around the house where the child had to find objects by following clues. The game was exciting, but it also taught the child to listen, follow directions, and think carefully. The little girl loved it, and the father watched with amazement as she engaged fully without creating chaos. Meals became another opportunity for connection. The little girl often refused to eat or complained about food, testing the patience of every maid. The new maid, however, approached meals with creativity. She involved the child in preparing simple dishes, letting her mix ingredients and make small decisions. The child felt important and respected, which made her more willing to eat and participate. The father noticed that for the first time, his daughter was genuinely excited about mealtime, rather than seeing it as a battle. The father began to feel a cautious optimism. He still remained attentive, aware that many maids had appeared promising but eventually failed. Yet there was something different about this maid. She did not try to control the child through rules or authority. Instead, she focused on understanding, patience, and gentle guidance. The little girl responded naturally to this approach, showing glimpses of the happy, cooperative child the father had always hoped for. Outside the house, the maid also encouraged the child to explore nature and the neighborhood safely. They went for walks, collected leaves, and watched birds together. The child's curiosity flourished in these moments, and she began asking questions about the world beyond the walls of the grand house. The maid answered patiently, turning every question into a small lesson. Slowly, the child began to see the maid not as a stranger or authority figure, but as a companion and guide. One afternoon, the little girl became upset because a toy she loved had broken. In the past, such moments would have led to tears, frustration, or tantrums. This time, the maid did not scold or try to fix it immediately. She sat beside the child, letting her express her feelings. She acknowledged the sadness and then suggested a way to repair the toy together. The child's tears turned into concentration and excitement as she worked alongside the maid to fix the broken toy. It was a small victory, but it marked a turning point in their relationship. The father noticed that for the first time in years, his daughter seemed genuinely happy and calm at home. There were no tantrums or battles for authority. Instead, there was laughter, curiosity, and learning. The little girl had someone who respected her spirit and guided her gently, rather than trying to change her. The father felt a wave of relief and gratitude, realizing that finding the right person for his daughter was not about skill or experience alone. It was about heart. Evenings were filled with storytelling and imagination. The maid created small stories based on the child's interests, turning bedtime into a magical time rather than a struggle. The child listened intently, asked questions, and even suggested plot twists, which the maid incorporated naturally. The father sometimes peeked into the room, amazed at how the child's energy had transformed into focus and creativity. The maid also learned to balance patience with boundaries. She understood that the child needed freedom to explore, but also gentle guidance to stay safe. She created routines that were flexible but consistent, allowing the child to anticipate what would happen next without feeling trapped. The little girl responded well, gradually learning to follow instructions without feeling controlled. In social situations, the maid's influence became apparent too. She helped the child navigate interactions with relatives, friends, and neighbors. The little girl, who once struggled with sharing and patience, began to show kindness and consideration. The father was amazed to see how quickly his daughter was adapting, learning, and growing under the maid's guidance. As weeks passed, the bond between the maid and the child strengthened. The little girl sought out the maid's company, asking for help, sharing stories, and even requesting advice. The maid listened, guided, and supported, creating a foundation of trust and affection. The father, once skeptical, now felt a deep sense of gratitude and relief. For the first time, he felt confident that his daughter was in safe, loving hands. One rainy evening, the father watched from his study as the little girl and the maid played a quiet game by the window. The rain fell gently outside, and the two were completely absorbed in their world of imagination and fun. The father realized that the house had finally changed. It was no longer just a grand building filled with luxury. It had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and love. The little girl looked up at the maid and whispered, "I like when you play with me. You make everything fun." The maid smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. "I like playing with you too," she said softly. "We make a good team, don't we?" The child nodded enthusiastically, feeling proud of their connection. The father felt tears prick his eyes. He knew then that finding the right person to care for his daughter was not about strict rules, instructions, or experience alone. It was about patience, understanding, and heart. The maid had succeeded where others had failed, not by trying to control the child, but by connecting with her, respecting her spirit, and guiding her with love. For the first time, the father allowed himself to believe that his daughter's happiness and growth were no longer fragile or temporary. The house was alive with warmth and joy, and the little girl's laughter was no longer a source of stress but a melody that filled the rooms. The search for the perfect caregiver had finally reached its answer, and the father felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between the little girl and the new maid grew stronger. The maid had become more than someone who tidied the house or prepared meals. She had become a trusted companion, a guide, and someone who could truly understand the child's mind. The little girl's spirit, which had been so challenging for others, now found a safe place to flourish. The morning routines changed subtly but meaningfully. The little girl no longer resisted getting dressed or brushing her hair. Instead, she would run to the maid, showing her outfits and asking which one looked best. The maid listened carefully, giving gentle suggestions rather than commands. This small change made the little girl feel respected and valued, and in turn she began listening and cooperating more naturally. Breakfast had also transformed into a shared moment rather than a battle. The maid invited the child to help prepare food, explaining the process as they worked together. The child chopped soft vegetables, mixed batter, and even poured ingredients into bowls under supervision. Each task became a playful lesson in responsibility and care. She began to take pride in helping, and the father noticed how much happier she was at the table, eating and enjoying her food without complaints. Beyond daily routines, the maid introduced simple yet meaningful activities that nurtured the child's curiosity and learning. They built small craft projects, painted pictures of imaginary lands, and created little books filled with stories they made together. The maid encouraged the child to express her ideas and imagination, never criticizing, always guiding gently. The child's face would light up when her creations were praised, reinforcing her confidence and encouraging her to explore her creativity even more. The maid also taught subtle lessons about empathy and understanding. One afternoon, while taking care of a neighbor's small garden, the child saw a little bird with a broken wing. She started crying, wanting to help but unsure how. The maid knelt beside her and calmly explained that they could care for the bird until it healed, teaching her patience, compassion, and responsibility. The child helped feed the bird and create a small safe space for it, learning how to care for others without becoming overwhelmed by her emotions. Even the father noticed the child's transformation. He often watched from his study or from a distance, quietly observing. Where there had been restlessness and mischief, there was now curiosity guided by care. The child had not lost her energy or enthusiasm, but it was now channeled in positive ways. She laughed freely, asked questions and played, but also listened when necessary and responded to guidance without resistance. The maid was careful not to push too hard or rush the child. She understood that growth and trust took time. Whenever the child became frustrated or impatient, the maid would pause, sit with her, and let her express her feelings. Then she would redirect the energy towards something productive like a drawing, a small game, or a short walk outside. Over time, the child began to mirror this patience, learning to calm herself when emotions ran high. Social interactions also improved. The little girl had previously struggled with sharing or waiting her turn, but the maid introduced games that naturally encouraged cooperation and kindness. Board games, building blocks, and small team projects became opportunities to teach empathy and consideration. The child gradually learned the joy of giving and sharing, realizing that helping others was just as rewarding as receiving attention herself. One day, the maid noticed that the child seemed sad while looking out the window. She asked gently what was wrong, and the child confessed that she missed her friends from school. The maid understood the feeling and proposed they write letters together to send to her friends. The little girl eagerly drew pictures, wrote her thoughts with guidance, and sealed the letters with care. When the letters were delivered, her joy was evident, and she felt a sense of connection that reassured her even while at home. Another important aspect of their growing relationship was trust. The child began sharing things she had never told anyone else. She spoke about her fears, her hopes, and her small secrets, knowing the maid would listen without judgment. The maid never forced the child to share, but she created a safe space where the little girl felt heard. This trust became the foundation of everything else, the games, lessons, and guidance. Without it, no rules or instructions could have worked. The maid also recognized the child's natural intelligence and curiosity. Whenever she asked questions about the world, why the sky was blue, how plants grew, or where the stars came from, the maid answered patiently, sometimes showing experiments or small examples. The child's questions became the starting points for learning, turning curiosity into discovery. Lessons were never forced or boring. They were woven seamlessly into everyday activities. The little girl began to enjoy learning as much as playing, a transformation the father had long hoped for. Meals, crafts, play, and learning were not the only ways the maid connected with the child. She also paid attention to emotional needs. When the child felt lonely or frustrated, the maid would sit beside her, talk quietly, and offer comfort. She validated feelings without overreacting, teaching the child that emotions are natural and manageable. Over time, the little girl became more self-aware and empathetic, learning to understand her own feelings as well as the feelings of others. Even the house itself seemed to respond to this change. Where there had once been chaos, mess, and tension, there was now order balanced with freedom. Toys were organized but accessible. The child could play and explore safely. Daily routines were followed, but with flexibility. The maid created an environment that encouraged growth without restricting joy, a delicate balance that had eluded everyone else before. The father's respect for the maid grew with each passing day. He had seen many people fail with his daughter, but this woman succeeded not by strictness or skill alone, but by heart. He realized that a true connection required patience, understanding, and the ability to listen. The maid was not just teaching the child about the world, she was guiding the father as well, showing him how love, patience, and consistency could transform behavior and nurture the spirit. Even outings became learning experiences. The maid took the child to parks, markets, and nearby gardens. She pointed out plants, animals, and people, explaining gently and encouraging questions. The child's curiosity blossomed in these moments, but it was tempered by guidance and attention. She learned to observe, appreciate, and understand without overwhelming herself or others. One memorable afternoon, the maid took the child to feed fish at a small pond. The little girl squealed with excitement, throwing food into the water and watching the fish gather. Then she noticed a small fish struggling near the edge and became concerned. The maid knelt beside her, explaining the situation calmly and showing her how to help safely. The child listened, followed instructions, and felt pride in making a difference. This moment of small responsibility taught empathy, patience, and careful observation, all wrapped in fun and engagement. The child also began to take pride in helping around the house. She set small tables, tidied up toys, and assisted the maid with chores when asked. It was never forced. She wanted to participate because she felt valued and respected. The father noticed the subtle changes, amazed at how the child's spirit, once uncontrollable, now coexisted with responsibility and awareness. Evenings became a special time. The maid and the child would sit together, creating stories, drawing pictures, or quietly reflecting on the day. The child shared her thoughts, dreams, and small fears. The maid listened patiently, offering comfort, advice, or gentle guidance when needed. The father often watched from the doorway, feeling a deep sense of peace he had not experienced in years. For the first time, his daughter was truly happy, and the household was filled with warmth instead of stress. Through all these small, daily moments, the child's transformation became evident. She remained lively, curious, and full of energy, but now that energy had direction. She could play, learn, and grow while also listening, cooperating, and showing care for others. The maid had not changed her spirit. She had nurtured it, providing structure through understanding rather than rules. The father often reflected on the journey. Many had tried and failed because they focused on controlling behavior or enforcing rules. This maid succeeded because she focused on connection, trust, and understanding. She treated the child as a person, not a problem. The little girl responded naturally to respect, patience, and warmth. It was a lesson for the father as well. Wealth, rules, or authority alone cannot create happiness or growth. Love, understanding, and consistent guidance are far more powerful. By the end of part 3, the house had transformed. Laughter replaced frustration, curiosity replaced mischief, and connection replaced chaos. The little girl had found a companion, guide, and mentor in the maid, someone who understood her heart and nurtured it with care. The father felt a deep sense of relief and gratitude, knowing that his daughter was in the right hands, and that the house was finally becoming the home he had always dreamed of. Months passed, and the change in the little girl was remarkable. She was no longer the child who tested everyone and made every day a struggle. Her laughter still filled the house, but now it carried a warmth that brought peace rather than tension. The maid had become an essential part of the child's life, someone she trusted completely and sought out for guidance, comfort, and companionship. The father watched these changes closely. He had experienced so many disappointments, so many moments where he feared no one could truly care for his daughter. But now he began to see something he had never seen before, a child flourishing, learning, and growing in confidence and joy. The maid's influence had transformed not only the child but the entire household. School mornings were smoother than ever. The little girl would get dressed with minimal fuss, brush her hair carefully, and pack her bag without reminders. She had developed a sense of responsibility, but it was not forced. It had grown naturally from the respect and trust the maid showed her every day. She even helped the maid organize her own things, showing awareness and thoughtfulness beyond her years. Breakfasts remained moments of shared joy. The child now enjoyed preparing simple dishes with the maid, learning about ingredients, measurements, and flavors. The maid explained small details like why certain foods are healthy or how cooking requires patience. The child listened carefully, sometimes asking questions that surprised even the maid. She had developed curiosity that went beyond simple games. She wanted to understand the world and learn through experience. The maid also encouraged the child to help others. One afternoon, they visited a small nearby shelter to deliver clothes and toys. The child carefully chose what to give, asking thoughtful questions about the people who would receive the items. She helped arrange things neatly, offering small words of kindness. The maid guided her gently, explaining the importance of generosity and empathy. The child returned home with a glow of pride, proud that she could make a difference. This sense of empathy extended into daily life. If someone in the household was tired or upset, the child would notice and offer help. She would carry small things for the maid, assist her with chores, or simply sit beside someone to keep them company. These were small gestures, but they marked a significant shift from the child who had once been entirely self-focused. She was learning the joy of caring for others. Learning had also become a natural part of daily life. The maid introduced small projects that combined fun with education. They observed plants growing in a small garden, learning about sunlight, water, and soil. They measured rainfall and recorded changes in leaves, turning curiosity into observation and understanding. The child began asking deeper questions, showing a growing ability to think critically and solve problems. The little girl's creativity flourished as well. Drawing, painting, and storytelling became regular activities. The maid encouraged her to invent stories, sometimes creating characters and adventures together. These moments were filled with laughter, imagination, and collaboration. The child's confidence grew as she realized her ideas mattered and could be expressed freely. She began showing pride in her work, wanting to share her creations with the father and others. Even the father became involved at times. He would occasionally join in a project, helping with a craft or discussing a small experiment. The maid guided him in interacting with his daughter in ways that were supportive rather than controlling. These moments strengthened the bond between father and child as well, and he realized that the maid's presence was helping him learn too, how to connect with his daughter more meaningfully, rather than just providing for her materially. One particularly memorable day, the child found a small injured animal outside the house. She was distressed and unsure what to do. The maid knelt beside her, calmly explaining how they could help without harming themselves or the animal. Together they created a safe space, provided food, and monitored the animal until it could recover. The child's compassion and patience shone brightly in these moments, and the father watched silently, amazed at the empathy and care his daughter now showed. Social interactions also improved greatly. The little girl learned to share, take turns, and play fairly with other children. The maid had introduced games that encouraged cooperation, and the child now approached friends with a sense of fairness and consideration. She could express her thoughts and feelings clearly, and she listened to others with genuine interest. The father noticed that her ability to connect socially had grown far beyond what he had expected. Even household chores were approached differently. The child would help tidy rooms, set the table, or assist in small tasks with genuine willingness. She no longer resisted or complained. Instead, she approached tasks with a sense of responsibility and pride. The maid encouraged this behavior gently, reinforcing the importance of contribution and teamwork without making it feel like punishment. The child's emotional intelligence was growing too. She could recognize her feelings and express them appropriately. When frustrated, she would take a deep breath or seek the maid's guidance rather than throwing tantrums. When happy, she shared her joy with others. This growth was gradual but consistent, and the father could see the results in her daily behavior. The maid also helped the child develop hobbies and interests. They explored music, art, and reading together. The child learned to play simple melodies, write short stories, and explore new ideas through books. Each discovery became an opportunity for learning, creativity, and self-expression. The maid guided these activities without imposing rules, allowing the child to follow her curiosity naturally. The little girl began to show a remarkable sense of independence. She could manage small tasks on her own, make decisions, and plan activities with guidance. The maid encouraged this independence by giving choices and allowing her to solve problems creatively. The father observed with pride as his daughter made thoughtful decisions and handled small responsibilities confidently. Evenings were a time of reflection and connection. The maid and child would sit together quietly, sharing thoughts about the day. The child spoke about her experiences, her feelings, and what she had learned. The maid listened carefully, offering guidance and support when needed. These moments reinforced trust, deepened understanding, and strengthened the bond that had formed over months of care and attention. The father began to realize the depth of the maid's impact. She had transformed more than the child. She had transformed the household. Where there had once been chaos, there was now order balanced with freedom. Where there had been stress, there was now laughter and warmth. The maid's patience, understanding, and gentle guidance had created a home where growth and happiness were possible. The little girl also began to show curiosity about the world beyond the house. She asked questions about people, places, and nature. The maid encouraged exploration safely, explaining things and turning every experience into a learning opportunity. The child's mind was growing, her understanding expanding and her imagination thriving. She was no longer confined by frustration or boredom, but guided by knowledge, curiosity, and care. One day, the child and maid were baking together when a small accident happened. A bowl tipped, spilling flour across the counter and floor. In the past, this would have led to frustration and chaos. This time, the child laughed and immediately started helping clean up, showing responsibility and cooperation. The maid guided her gently, turning the incident into a lesson in patience, care, and problem-solving. The father, witnessing this, felt a surge of pride and gratitude. The child's confidence grew as she achieved small successes every day. Completing a craft, helping an animal, managing a task independently, each moment reinforced her sense of capability. The maid celebrated these victories with her, encouraging her to feel proud while teaching humility and gratitude. The child learned to enjoy accomplishment without arrogance, a balance that would serve her well in life. Even playtime became more meaningful. The child invented games that required thought, teamwork, and creativity. The maid joined in, offering guidance and encouragement. These moments strengthened the bond between them and taught the child important skills while still being fun. The father noticed that even her play was now an opportunity for growth, not just energy release. The maid also became a guide for the father. He observed her interactions and learned to approach his daughter with patience, empathy, and understanding. He realized that strict rules and authority alone were not enough to nurture a child's spirit. The maid's approach taught him that love, attention, and consistent guidance could achieve far more than control or discipline ever could. By the end of Part 4, the house had become a place of balance, warmth, and growth. The little girl had developed maturity, empathy, and curiosity, guided gently by the maid's patience and understanding. The father could finally relax, knowing that his daughter was not only happy but thriving. He saw how the right guidance could channel energy, curiosity, and spirit into positive growth, and he felt grateful that they had finally found someone who could succeed where so many had failed. The house was quiet that morning, but in a peaceful, content way. The little girl sat at the table, her eyes bright as she carefully arranged her toys, planning a small game she wanted to play with the maid. The maid moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast, but she kept an eye on the child, occasionally smiling at a clever arrangement or a funny idea. The father stood in the doorway, watching with a sense of calm he had not felt in years. It had been months since the maid first arrived, and the change in the child was remarkable. She was still lively and full of energy, but now that energy was balanced with thoughtfulness, empathy, and understanding, she had grown more confident, independent, and caring. Yet her playful spirit remained untouched. She had learned to respect boundaries, but she did so willingly because she understood the value of guidance, not because she was forced. The maid knelt beside her, helping adjust a small piece of the game. "You are very creative," she said softly. "I like the way you think." The little girl beamed at the praise. "I learned from you," she replied, her voice full of pride. The maid smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. "And I have learned from you too," she said. "Every day with you teaches me something new." The father felt a lump in his throat. He realized that the maid had not only guided the child but had transformed the household. Where there had once been chaos, frustration, and impatience, there was now laughter, curiosity, and warmth. The child's growth had changed everything. She was thriving in ways the father had only dreamed of. And he knew it was because of the patience, care, and understanding of the maid. Breakfast was a quiet, joyful affair. The little girl helped pour juice into glasses and place plates on the table. She asked the maid questions about the ingredients and the process, showing curiosity and thoughtfulness. The maid answered patiently, turning each question into a small lesson. The child listened attentively, sometimes asking follow-up questions that revealed how much she had learned over the past months. After breakfast, the father suggested they all go for a walk in the nearby park. The little girl eagerly agreed, putting on her shoes quickly and grabbing her coat. The maid helped her as she always did, ensuring she was ready without rushing or scolding. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air, and the little girl immediately noticed the birds, flowers, and trees. She began pointing out different colors and shapes, asking questions about each one. The maid answered calmly, encouraging exploration and observation. As they walked, the little girl noticed a small group of children playing a game she had never seen before. She ran over excited to join but paused when she saw a younger child struggling to participate. She hesitated, looking back at the maid. The maid smiled and nodded, encouraging her to approach. The little girl walked over carefully, helping the younger child join the game. She guided gently, showing patience and kindness. The father watched quietly, amazed at how naturally she had learned empathy and cooperation. After a while, they returned home, the little girl chatting excitedly about the new game and the friends she had helped. The maid listened, asking questions and encouraging her to reflect on what had happened. "You were very kind to help him," she said. The child nodded proudly. "I wanted him to have fun too," she replied. The maid smiled. "And that shows how much you care about others." Later in the afternoon, the little girl suggested they bake a small cake together. The maid agreed, and they moved to the kitchen. The child carefully measured ingredients, poured, mixed, and arranged everything with care. The maid guided her gently, explaining the steps and showing small techniques. The child listened attentively, sometimes asking why certain things were done a certain way. The maid explained with patience, turning each step into a small lesson in understanding and responsibility. While the cake was baking, the little girl and maid sat together at the table, drawing pictures and sharing stories. The child told tales of imaginary adventures, sometimes asking the maid to add to the story. The maid listened, suggested ideas, and encouraged the child to expand her imagination. The father watched from the doorway, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that the maid had not only nurtured his daughter's behavior and manners, but had also cultivated her creativity, curiosity, and love for learning. When the cake was ready, they shared it together, enjoying the results of their efforts. The little girl beamed, proud of their creation. The maid praised her gently, reminding her that teamwork and care had made it possible. The father joined them, taking a small slice and smiling at the joy on his daughter's face. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace and fulfillment in his home. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection and bonding. The child would often sit with the maid, sharing thoughts about her day, questions about the world, and small secrets. The maid listened patiently, offering guidance when necessary, but never judgment. The child felt safe expressing herself, knowing she would be understood and supported. This trust had grown steadily over months, creating a foundation of security and love that would last for years. The father also began to rely on the maid's guidance in understanding his daughter. He observed her interactions, listened to her insights, and learned how to connect with the child more meaningfully. The maid had shown him that true care required patience, empathy, and consistency, not wealth, authority, or strict rules. He began applying these lessons in small ways, strengthening his bond with his daughter even further. The little girl's schoolwork also improved. She had developed focus, patience, and a genuine desire to learn. The maid encouraged curiosity and understanding rather than rote memorization. She helped the child explore subjects that interested her, showing how knowledge could be fun and rewarding. The child approached learning with enthusiasm, asking questions and seeking guidance, a far cry from the struggles she had faced before. Over time, the little girl became a role model for other children in her social circle. She shared, helped, and listened, showing empathy and understanding beyond her years. Friends and relatives noticed the change, often asking the father what had happened. He would smile and simply say that patience, understanding, and love had worked wonders. The maid's influence was clear in every aspect of the child's behavior, from her creativity and curiosity to her empathy and confidence. The father also realized the lasting impact the maid had on their family dynamic. She had not only transformed the child but had brought warmth, patience, and harmony to the household. Arguments were rare, laughter was frequent, and the home felt alive with joy rather than tension. He understood that finding the right caregiver was not about experience or credentials alone. It was about heart, empathy, and the ability to connect meaningfully with the child. One quiet afternoon, the little girl sat with the maid, sharing a story she had written herself. She read it aloud, her voice full of pride and excitement. The maid listened attentively, offering praise and gentle guidance. "You have grown so much," she said softly. "I am proud of you." The little girl hugged her tightly. "I could not have done it without you," she whispered. The maid smiled, holding her close, knowing that the bond they had formed was unbreakable. The father watched from a distance, tears in his eyes. He realized that the maid had succeeded where so many others had failed. She had not only cared for his daughter but had nurtured her spirit, guided her growth, and created a lasting foundation of trust, love, and understanding. For the first time, he felt a deep sense of gratitude and peace, knowing that his daughter's happiness and growth were secure. As days turned into months, the bond between the maid and the child only deepened. The child continued to learn, grow, and explore, guided gently by the maid's patience and understanding. The father saw the transformation in every small moment, how she approached tasks, treated others, and expressed herself creatively and thoughtfully. He understood that the maid's influence had shaped not only his daughter's behavior, but her heart and mind. The house itself seemed transformed. Where there had once been tension and frustration, there was now laughter, curiosity, and warmth. Toys and books were organized but accessible, allowing the child to explore freely. Meals were shared with joy, lessons were learned naturally, and playtime was filled with creativity and fun. The home had become a place of growth, love, and harmony, a reflection of the trust and connection that had developed between the child and the maid. The father often reflected on the journey. He had experienced doubt, frustration, and worry, but the arrival of the maid had changed everything. She had succeeded not by imposing rules or authority, but by understanding, guiding, and connecting with the child. She had nurtured the little girl's curiosity, creativity, and empathy, helping her become the confident, caring, and joyful child she was today. One evening, as the sun set and the house was bathed in warm light, the little girl sat with the maid, sharing a quiet moment. She leaned against her shoulder, feeling safe, understood, and loved. "I like it when you are here," she said softly. The maid smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I like being with you too," she said. "We make a great team." The child nodded, feeling a sense of belonging and trust she had never experienced before. The father entered the room quietly, observing the scene. He realized that the maid was more than a caregiver. She was a guide, a mentor, and a lasting presence in his daughter's life. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and relief, knowing that she had succeeded where so many others had failed. The house was no longer just a building filled with luxury. It had become a home filled with love, laughter, and learning. In the weeks and months that followed, the little girl continued to thrive. She learned new skills, developed friendships, and explored the world with curiosity and confidence. The maid remained a steady presence, guiding, teaching, and supporting her every step of the way. The father continued to witness the transformation, feeling proud, grateful, and reassured that his daughter's happiness and growth were in safe hands. By the end of Part 5, the family had reached a sense of harmony and fulfillment that had seemed impossible at the beginning. The little girl had grown into a confident, caring, and creative child. The maid had become an irreplaceable part of her life, providing guidance, support, and love. The father had learned the true value of patience, understanding, and connection. Together, they had created a home filled with joy, learning, and warmth. A home where the little girl could thrive and grow, safe, happy, and deeply loved.